Hello and welcome to the podcast, Smart Money Simplified, with your host, Brent Mekosh. Brent, we were going to have a guest on this podcast, but difficulties in Baghdad seem to have
Yeah.
kept that guest from happening. So I can't
Yes, I'm
imagine
actually
what
really
that might
excited about
be.
this. It's soon to be announced guest, but we had a guest who is actually on the ground in Baghdad, Iraq, and I was very looking forward to what this discussion, which hopefully we'll still have in the future. But Bill and I were sitting here talking offline, and which we normally do that. We normally talk offline for a while before we do these shows, and then we do for a while afterwards, and just talking about things that are happening in the world and in the economy and everything else. And Bill and I said to each other, why don't we just record one of these and share with you some of the things that we talk about when it's just Bill and I on the microphone together.
Yeah. Well, 2023 has been one of those years, Brent, as you know, probably better than me, actually.
Yeah. It has been in many ways it's been pretty good, particularly in the last, at least for the financial markets, whether it's fixed income, whether it's equities, particularly in the last 6 weeks, we've seen just a real sea change in both of those markets. But it's been a really strange year. But so far, we're coming into now as we're recording this on December 11th, so we're almost done the year, but not quite. But overall, a pretty good year, a lot better than 2022. A lot of
Yeah, but
things.
it wasn't for a long time. So let's talk about that for a second,
Yeah,
because traditionally the argument is, hey, if you've got a mix of bonds and stocks, you can have a balanced portfolio, kind of protect yourself or hedge
right.
yourself against wild fluctuations in the market, and that has not been the case this year. This year has been a really tough market to navigate until, as you point out, the last month or so,
Yeah.
when things have really started to turn around. So, what was going on?
Well, we're coming off a year in 2022 that was historic in a lot of ways. And to me, the biggest story of that year was not so much the S&P was down about 20% in 2022. And that's pretty typical. I mean, most investors, they're used to volatility in the stock market. I tell clients that, you know, 2 out of every 8 years, you're just going to not really like some of the performance that you're getting in
It's going
equities,
to be
but
funky. Yeah.
it's going to be funky. And you're used to that. But what made 2022 totally unique for anyone alive is you had double digit losses in the fixed income market. And one of the measures that we look at, think of the Dow Jones or think of the S&P 500 in terms of a broad measure of a lot of different securities. But in the bond world, the big one's the Barclays Aggregate Bond Index.
Hmm.
And that was off about 13-14% in 2022. And even in years in the 1970s where we had rampant inflation and you had a lot of problems very similar to what we are experiencing still now, you had maybe single digit losses in the bond market. You never saw double digit losses in your
Right.
fixed income. So it was you got to go back 200 years, quite frankly, to the early days of the Republic for U.S. Treasury bonds at the 10-year level to be down in double digits. It just doesn't happen. And it happened in 2022. And it happened in a year where your equities are also down in double digits. So it was the worst year pretty much ever for what you discuss as a balanced portfolio, your average 60-40 portfolio, 60% equities,
Yeah.
40% fixed income. And coming into this year, that's everyone's expecting a recession. I can't tell you how much doom and gloom stuff was on YouTube by a lot of the financial, entertainment guys, and I read them and I look at a lot of them, both the pros and the cons, people that are optimistic, people that are very pessimistic, because I just want to see what my clients are hearing first of all. But I did come in, and I got to be honest with you, I was not necessarily feeling great coming into January either. A lot of red flags out there, a lot of things that are concerning from an economic standpoint, from a geopolitical standpoint, from a political standpoint. But what kind of kept me optimistic coming into January was, if 2023, and we don't know yet, we're not through it, but if we were going to get a crash or a massive dislocation, specifically in equity prices,
Yeah.
it would have been the best forecast crash in history, because you had so many people out there saying, the S&P is going to go down to 2,500. Here we are sitting about 4,500. It's going to, all these terrible things are going to happen. And it just didn't. You had a massive bank failure in the front end of the year, which ironically enough did not, at this point anyway, didn't spill over into the rest of the market. Equities rallied off that because you had a big injection of cash in the Federal Reserve once that happened. So it's, the world never ends up quite like you think. And 2023 was one of those years. It was interesting to say the least. And until really in the last 6 weeks or so, it was still a little bit dicey. You had losses in bond
Yeah.
portfolios. You had a handful of stocks that were driving the S&P 500, but it's been pretty broad based, this rally we've had in the last month and a half or so.
I mean, is it the argument that the Fed was raising rates that just caused the? I mean, the bond market was a mess,
Yeah,
and I
total
mean,
mess.
does it just come down to the fact that the Fed had embarked and remained committed to until very recently raising interest rates? Is that? I mean, is it that simple, or is there something more complex at work here?
I think it kind of is, and it's a big thing. And the old adage, "Don't fight the Fed," is definitely a real thing. But the Fed raised a ton this year, and you're looking at a case where equities are pretty much up. Um, but I think that I'm one of the few guys, at least on the financial side, that actually thinks what the Federal Reserve was doing was necessary and needed.
Mm-hmm.
And we had some pain while they were doing it, but it had to happen. Because you can't keep interest rates at zero forever, because
Right.
it distorts the economy too much. If there's no hurdle rate for return on your money, then really unprofitable projects get funded, because your hurdle rate is so low,
Mm-hmm.
and you just can't give away money. That's why you had 9% inflation in June of 2022, which was the official number. I think the real number is probably a lot higher than that. And you had to do something to sort of to pull the froth out of it. But you still look, we're sitting here at 5.25 ish on the short term rate. That's still historically pretty low. I mean, when
Yeah,
I
it
got
is.
it's not high. I mean, my first mortgage back in the mid 1990s, when I was living in New York, I was paying 8 7/8, I
Yeah,
think, is what I was paying.
that's about
Um,
right. Yeah.
yeah, and the average 10-year treasuries right now is trading at about 4.25%. Average is really like 5.5 or 6.
Mm-hmm.
So rates are still historically low. And if the Fed's going to pause here or not, it looks like they are going to pause here. At least the markets are responding like they are. I think they're doing the work that had to be done. And I think so far, I think they've managed it pretty well. And you're seeing their balance sheet roll off too. The amount of money that the Federal Reserve, when the Fed buys an asset, they do it with money that never existed. And
Right.
so you look at their balance sheet, went from a trillion or so, before the financial crisis, up to about $8 trillion by the time we got done with all the COVID stimulus. And that's money that never existed. So of course you're going to get some inflation. And now you see the Fed balance sheets actually rolling off. They're letting bonds mature, and that money essentially gets pulled out of the system. And I think it's necessary what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Now the issue is they're fighting against the federal government that can't stop spending money. And so for me, the big story of 2024, and we can talk about that too, because there's a lot more in 2023 we can discuss. But the big story in 2024 is going to be that you got, the U.S. federal government has about $6-7 trillion of debt they got to refinance. They're running deficits of $1.5 trillion, $2 trillion. So there could be $8 to $10 trillion of treasury debt that has to be refinanced. And the question is, who buys it? And some of the recent treasury auctions haven't been fantastic. They haven't, I've seen some headlines, oh, the treasury auctions failed. They didn't fail. You didn't have as much coverage as you normally get. You still had 2+ times coverage on people that want to buy the stuff.
Yeah.
But it's coming down a little bit. And you've got foreigners are not showing up with the appetite that they once had to buy our debt. And if the foreigners don't buy it, and if we don't have Americans buying it, well, then the Fed's got to buy it, and that by very definition is inflationary, because now again they're doing it with money that's brand new, that's never been created. So that to me, I think is going to be the big story of 2024, is how well that process gets managed.
Yeah. My reaction to that is twofold. One is, yeah, I agree with you in terms of the Fed doing probably what needed to be done. And you're right in terms of the perspective, because these rates are high by recent memory, but
Yeah,
in terms of overall, they're not.
they're not.
They are really not that high at all, historically speaking. And so it's a good thing to remember as we move into 2024. And there is a fight right now. I'm just curious. I'd love to get your take on this. There is a fight within the government, within the House, between Republicans about what to do about this. Are you optimistic that we can arrive at some kind of solution in terms of government spending? I personally don't think we're ever going to be able to cut spending, and I would love to be able to say that we were going to cut spending.
I don't know, because I think that the issue that you have at the federal level is twofold. Is first, they are extremely insulated, where they don't
That's an
necessarily.
understatement.
Yeah, so they don't feel the impact of the decisions that they're making. And so one of the things that I even have to keep in mind in terms of my business, because the clients that we work with, generally speaking, not generally, in every case, have done pretty well in life.
Right.
And so my view of the world in terms of what's really happening on the ground can be distorted by the fact that all my clients are doing pretty well. They're
Mhm.
doing okay. Um, and I think in Washington, it's a bigger problem because there is so much wealth and so much money that's being sucked like into that vortex, so much power, so much influence. It's all there. And they are not right now, they're insulated. They're insulated by what's happening in
Mhm.
the middle of the country. They're insulated what's happening in rough parts of our cities. They're insulated by what's happening on the border. They don't see any of it, and they're not exposed to it. So it's like for maybe an apt example for anybody that's seen the Hunger Games series. Capital City is very different than what's happening in the outer
Yes.
districts. And it's like that's where reality is basically is mirroring fiction or vice versa. And I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of that. So are they going to do things? Because every time they vote, I always say this with people as well, and which is why I tend to have a very libertarian streak in me, is because when the first directive of any institution or organization is to protect itself and then expand itself. It's just naturally that's what nature does. You want
Right.
to protect yourself and grow. And what makes governments very different, and I look at it from a charitable standpoint, for example, if someone falls upon hard times, I believe that there should be safety nets and things in place to help them. Traditionally, that has been, hopefully they've got people in their family that are willing to do it. If they don't have family that can help them out and maybe right that ship, then maybe they're part of a faith institution, a mosque or a church or a synagogue or whatever that can get behind that person and
Mhm.
help lift them up. If they don't have that, then in many cases, there's other organizations within their communities. The community itself has a vested interest in kind of getting that person whole again. But in all three of those instances, whether it's family, whether it's a faith community, whether it's the local communities overall, they don't have unlimited resources, and they have a vested interest in fixing that person or trying to solve that problem. You enter a bureaucracy, the first directive of any bureaucracy is to protect and expand the bureaucracy. And so there's not the incentive structure in place to get that person right again. The incentive structure is actually keep that person dependent, keep that person needing the
Yeah.
bureaucracy because we got to spend this money every year. We don't want our budget cut next year.
Right.
And so there's no, and because there's no natural competition, there's no competing organizations that can do it better or it's the incentive structure in government is completely askew from what it is in the rest of the world. And so that's why I think it's going to be a lot harder for them to go and vote to essentially diminish their power. No agency head wants to diminish their power. None of these groups that are being funded with however much money they're being funded want to take less money next year. All the incentive structure is towards growing and expanding, growing, expanding, growing, expanding. And there's no natural predator. You know what I mean? There's
Yeah.
nothing,
No.
if even on a massive corporate level, Apple starts making bad products, and then you switch over to, there's a million other people that you can go to and to buy a decent computer, or buy another cell phone, and that's a quasi monopoly system. Really, there's only a few competitors, but it keeps them in check, and you just don't have that. You don't have that at the government level.
No, you don't. You don't. And sadly, you don't really, have the leadership within government
Yeah,
either.
that's a big one because I think, and this cuts across political lines.
Exactly.
When I look at the past, and not even just in the United States, but around the world. I mean, you had giants roaming the planet. People that just could clearly articulate a vision that was optimistic, was unifying, gave people a sense of meaning and purpose for what we're all trying to do together. And I don't see anybody in our politics right now, left or right, that does that effectively. I think there's a few media people that do it maybe a little bit better, but they don't. They don't. I mean, you can't tell me. And again, this cuts across political lines. No, you never listen to President Biden speak, and I don't anyway, and walk away feeling really optimistic about America. I'm hit with a barrage of everything that's wrong with this country. You don't hear a former President Trump speak very rarely and feel incredibly optimistic about the future in terms of what's happening. It's all focus on the problems, on the issues. It's not focused on the fundamental values and principles which made this country great. It's all about how screwed up this place is.
Well, yeah,
And
and Brett, just to jump in here for a second, I worked for plenty of bosses who rightly had the attitude when I would come in to talk to them about an issue or a problem, they would look at me and they would go, I don't want to hear about the problem. I want to know what your solutions are.
Right.
So that you become a solution-oriented person. You start thinking, okay, yeah, there are problems here, but there are solutions, which is a fundamentally different way of looking at it than any politician I typically think of.
Yeah.
And I,
And 100% agree with you on that. And I think that unfortunately the way that our political discourse is being delivered to us, I mean, that's one of the reasons I love podcasting. It's a long form conversation. And
yes.
you cannot break down big ideas into a 30-second soundbite. And even you look at the recent debates, I mean, they're a joke. They're a complete joke because you have 30 seconds to answer, Governor DeSantis or whoever it is. And this is not how the world works. I mean, you've got complex issues demand more time and discussion. You look at, the Lincoln Douglas debates, and when Lincoln was running for president, we're going now a long time ago, they would sit there and just and back and forth have a real debate for an hour and a half, 2 hours. And I think, I mean, I would love to hear every political candidate, including the current president of the United States, including third party guys like RFK that are out there, sit on, whether it's Rogan or whether it's somebody with a massive audience, that can reach a million, because they're reaching way more than network TV is by eons,
by factors,
way more,
exponentially. Yes.
Yeah. And see, and like put these people all on, can they hold a conversation for 2.5 hours and answer questions on the fly without notes in front of them that have not been curated by their internal people? Is there enough brain power and horsepower happening upstairs where they can do these things? And I was fortunate enough when I was back in New York. When I was a member of the New York Stock Exchange, we had a bunch of politicians always come down there, and you had celebrities came down there. It was kind of cool and kind of fun. And I met a number of these politicians, and we're talking people that were relevant, in the mid 2000s, back when I was doing that.
Right.
It was staggering, honestly. I'll just say it, how stupid a lot of them were. I was able, we had a thing in New York for members called the Luncheon Club. It was upstairs at the Stock Exchange, and I had a beer with a few of these guys because they come and they want money, and the membership would meet them, and you could share a beer with them. And when you could actually, it was a one-on-one format where you could ask them questions, and they didn't know what the heck they were talking about. I mean, a lot of these people were profoundly dumb. And that always kind of really struck me because I'm like, great on camera, great to throw out the soundbite, very slick. I would buy a used vehicle from many of them, but an ability to really dissect issues, and it's just staggering to me. I remember we're going totally different area in this than we were talking. We were going to talk about 2023, but I remember when John Kerry ran for president in 2004. I was invited to go to one of his fundraising dinners, and so you had John Kerry, who was exactly what you think he is. You had Teresa Heinz Kerry, who was a riot, by the way. There's a picture of me somewhere after several beers with my arm around her, chatting with her. But I met Al Sharpton's, and Charlie Rangel was around at the time, and Jesse Jackson, and pretty much if they were a big Democratic person, they were at this event. And I was just, I walked out of there, and a few people were actually kind of were fairly impressed. I got to admit, Al Sharpton was there. Actually, I had a great conversation with Al Sharpton. Again, but I don't agree with him on a lot of issues, but the rest of them, it's like, my God, man, these are the people that are making decisions for us. But anyway,
I got to tell you, man, I would love for there to be a format of meaningful conversation.
Yes.
You're right. The podcast would probably be the best place for that to happen, because I keep arguing all the time. This country's badly, desperately in need of grown-up conversations.
Yes.
And political campaigns are not grown-up conversations.
Not at all. They're not at all. And to your point, a grown-up conversation talking about actual reality, like where we are at. And there's so many good things that are happening in this country. There are so many things that absolutely need to be changed. I mean, I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic about America. I think it was, it takes us some time occasionally to get the ship right. But when we do, the amount of, entrepreneurial energy that exists in this country is astounding, and what we can bring in terms of creativity to the world. And the natural benefits that we have. You got plenty of water, you got land, you got a workforce, you got, rule of law. You've got so many good things happening relative to the rest of the world. I mean, this is the place to be in the future. But the people that are pulling massive levers of power, most of them are in the business of again, breaking people down into these atomized little categories that then they market specifically to that. A lot of them are focused on, trying to get people to really focus on what their grievances are, because then they can be the person to come in and save the day. And they're not talking about how do we move the ball forward, for society in general and as a whole.
Well, no, because once you get
made.
elected, your primary goal becomes getting reelected.
Mm-hmm.
I once knew a guy one time who was thinking really seriously about running for an upper level office. And he said, "What do you think?" And I just laughed. And I said, "Well, I think you would enjoy the race. And I think you'd have a great time at your party. But when you woke up the next day and you realized, wait a minute, I got to start raising money to go do this all over again, I think you'd be like, what did I just do?"
Yeah.
Because it is.
Yeah. And it's, it costs a boatload of money.
It does.
And every, and everybody that are funding these campaigns, they're doing it for a reason. They're doing it because hopefully they're going to get whatever their agenda
Here's
is.
what we can hope for. Let's hope that somehow, maybe some podcast, Joe Rogan, somebody comes up with the idea of like, let's get two politicians in a room and sit them down together and have conversations. If it's a beginning of just like the two leading Republican candidates or three, if we could get them in a room, and if we could get Robert Kennedy in a room, if we could get people in a room to talk to them, because these are actually some very interesting people with some very. I've listened to podcasts with Robert Kennedy, and I probably wouldn't vote for him, but the man thinks about issues.
He does,
and so it would be interesting to hear some kind of collective conversation about that. It would be great, and then it would solve the political leadership problem, because now suddenly we'd be demanding that our leaders know what they're talking about.
Right. Very true. I agree with you. And I think that, when you've heard, and I don't know whether the invitation's been extended or not for many of these politicians. But yeah, I've listened to RFK's doing all the long form discussions. Like I've listened to probably 3 or 4 podcasts he's been on where he's spoken for an hour and a half, 2 hours or more. And the guy actually can, and again, do I agree with him on a lot of things? No. Do I agree with him on some things? Yes. But it's pretty, it's nice to actually hear what he has to say.
It is.
And I don't know if I were anybody in the Republican field right now. I mean, last 2 debates are going to be on CNN. What, 2-3 million people are going to watch it? Maybe. No one cares, because they're basically clown shows at this point. Again, this is not geared at any of those candidates. I'm just talking about the process is ridiculous. But if I were any one of those people, I would be banging on, whether it's Lex Friedman, whether it's Rogan, whether it's Tucker, and you don't have to like who these hosts are, but their viewership and their listenership is tens of millions of people, and they ask real questions, And
we're talking about podcasts that have 20, 30, 40 million listeners per edition.
Yes.
But I agree. I agree.
It's the truth. The only people who are watching, and the statistics, this is not a knock on anybody, but the statistics show this. The only people watching cable news are generally boomers. That's it. I mean, you take the boomer demographic away, and whether it's CNN, whether it's Fox, MSNBC, no one's watching. No one else is there. Because they're all getting their media from alternative platforms. So if you want to connect with America now, sure, you still got to do the major network stuff, because there is a viewership there and there's people watching it, but that's not where you're going to get your message out.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So that's
let's have our fingers crossed and hope something happens in that regard. I mean, the one thing I think that before we get away from 2023 that we have to talk about, and it's a big mystery component actually, is those 2 little letters that everybody's talking about now. AI.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I mean, give me your take on this, because it's like I'm besieged with ideas on where to invest and what to avoid and how it's the end of civilization and blah 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 blah.
I think I'm very. It's an area where I'm very optimistic. You've got. I'm actually doing a class right now, a virtual class at Wharton, where we're diving into this, and There's a lot of these different AI programs that I'm personally fooling around with because I want to learn how this stuff works. There's the doom and gloom camp that says it's going to get like the nuclear launch codes and kill us all. And then there's the people that say that you're going to get utopia on Earth because all the problems are going to be solved. Now, I don't believe
Right.
either of those things. I think what AI is going to do is going to naturally leverage what people can already do well. So it's almost in the sense where, that phone that's in your pocket, it leverages your ability to access information, reach out and talk to anybody in the world, learn things, do things, that type of thing. And it's double-edged sword. It also is a massive time waste. You could be watching like cat videos on YouTube, and not doing anything productive with it.
Falling down that hole, yeah.
Yeah, but I think what it will do, where I think the negative of AI could possibly come in, it's not these existential threats. It's twofold. It's one is I think that the ability to deep fake things is going to be so massive that it will have people questioning reality, because
Yes.
you could take just on the data that we have produced in this conversation, you could deep fake you and I saying a lot of things that we didn't say.
We never ever said. I
That
know.
we never ever said. You could have video of, and imagine now, if you and I do, realistically speaking, is it gonna ripple anything? Maybe in our immediate circle it would, but overall no. But what if you had the president of the United States come up and say that we're, like whatever it might be, whether it's a controversial topic or something of massive military geopolitical significance, but you didn't say it, but the video, oh my gosh, you did. Here's the video, and what could immediate reactions to that type of thing be? So I think that number one is a real danger, because people are going to not know unless someone's right in front of them what's real and what's not. And they need to believe in the systems and structures that are around them. They need, like, my first rule of life actually is accept reality. And that's like, financial problem, it's reality. Way too much, it's reality. You got to accept reality, because then you can go and hopefully change it. But what if the reality you're being presented is completely warped? And that's, I think, biggest risk. The second biggest risk is, I think, that there's a possibility, if you look at how humanity ends, is it with a bang or a whimper? AI is not going to be, I don't think anyway, it's not going to be the bang. It's not going to be, again, nuclear launch codes and the Terminator's trying to destroy us all, cybernet's online. It's that you can create these virtual worlds around yourself, that almost like the Matrix in a sense, that are going to be so appealing to people that their life just gets increasingly wasted in those worlds. And then they're not out getting married, and they're not having kids, and they're not.
The danger is we become more insular. We become more protective from one another and less connected with each other. Yep. But I also, in my mind, Brent, I look at I look at this and I think, well, wait, the advent of the Industrial Revolution created a huge unsettling and of civilization, so that I wonder if AI isn't in some way analogous to the Industrial Revolution, only this is a different kind of revolution, which does have the potential to radically change things as we know it.
Yes, and I think it will, in the sense that, and the question in terms of the technology overall versus the investing side of it, and I'm just talking about the technology overall, but I think that what it will do, and I'll tell you, this is an interesting conversation. I think that the people that are in pure knowledge and service businesses, which is a business I am for sure in, better really take heed of what this thing is, because what it will do is the technical work, it will be able to take a lot of that over. And I think about this in my own business, craft portfolios, you want to, review legal documents. If you're an attorney, you want to look for examples where perhaps you can save some money on taxes. And right now you've got people with technical expertise that are doing that. The technology is going to replace that ability. And so I think that if you're in a service business like that, whether it's, legal, finance, whatever, the what can you then bring to the table is your ability to check it, first of all, because the AI makes mistakes. Yeah. But secondly, the ability to connect and communicate with people. So you're using the AI to leverage your offering, but the one-on-one connection, which is what we have less and less of, I think that's where the value is really going to be. And I think of, I look at my son. My son's 8, almost 9. My daughter's 3. But my son specifically, I was having this conversation with somebody the other day, and somehow college came into it. He's 9, 10 years away from that. But I said, I said, right, yeah, of course we're funding the 529 and we're doing all that stuff, and hopefully the money's going to be there. But 20 years ago, it would have been like, let's get him into a great college. He's going to learn a great skill and go be an attorney or a doctor or something like that.
Yeah.
And I think for certain, medicine's one where you got to go to medical school. You got to be able to take apart a human body and know how it works. But I was saying to my friend, I'm like, you know what? I said, in my son's case, I was like, maybe the better, and we won't know this till he's 18. I don't know what his aptitude is. You don't go to college. You learn carpentry, you learn electrician, you learn something in the energy space. You know how to run a well, or whatever it might be. And so you're doing things that this AI, this information machine, which is what AI can't do. You're doing things out in the physical world as opposed to numbers and virtual and everything else. And if he has any entrepreneurial bent, by the time he's in his mid-20s, he knows his trade. And if he's got an entrepreneurial bent, then maybe he goes out and he hires a few people, and then he hires a couple more people. And no college education, but real world learning in terms of how to do things in the real world. And by the time he's in 30s, we have clients like this. By the time they're in their 30s, 40s, they got businesses worth millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Hey,
look, I have a good friend of mine, a good friend of mine who never went to college.
Yeah.
And he owns a company. It's an excavating company. And he has hired a bunch of guys over the years and provided basically a living to a bunch of families over the years. And he's worth a considerable amount now because of the work he did. And this is a guy who never went to college.
No.
And, he provides, he gives us productive, necessary services.
Yeah, I mean, Bill Gates dropped out of college. Michael Dell dropped out of college. I mean, a lot of people are billionaires. Richard Branson. I mean, come on,
right?
And so I think that, and you're talking to a guy here that has a master's degree. So I took it to all the way through. I think the college, the university system as it is structured right now, is one of the biggest scams that exist in our economy. I think that, and even if you do the math on it, there's it's a handful of schools where your return on that invested capital, if you look at your education on that, where you're getting a positive rate of return. Most of them you're not. And the diabolical thing about at least to me, the education system is that, you can't discharge student loans in a bankruptcy proceeding. You can walk away from a house, you can walk away from credit card debt, you can walk away from your car. There's a lot of things you can walk away from. And I think the bankruptcy protections that we have in this country are one of the things that have made this economy vibrant and working, because if you fail, you can fail spectacularly enough that you can discharge all the debt and you can try it again. A lot of great business leaders we've had in the past have had several bankruptcies, in their history before they got it right. But you can't do it with student debt. And so if you allowed, and that's if I was granted dictatorial powers of the United States, several things I'd do. But one of the things I would do is just simply change the rules where you can discharge your student debt in a bankruptcy proceeding. Because guess what would happen? Whoever's underwriting that debt would now have to really think, is this specific degree, can you make any money at it? Is taking $200,000 worth of student debt worth it for a job where you max might make yourself 40 or 50 grand a year? And it would change that math. The other thing, I would get the government out of it completely, where private lenders have to make those loans, and you've got to make your case, and go through an underwriting process to be able to take on that debt. Like right now, it's like it's almost default option, for Pete's sake, as people are paying the tuition to just take on this debt, and it's awful. And I took on some student debt when I got my master's degree. I was fortunate at the time. The company I was with was Bear Stearns was the mothership that kind of ran our partnership, but they paid for half of it. And I paid for half of it. And one of the great things, the day I paid that debt off, I was like, oh, okay, good riddance. You know what I mean? Because it's never going to go away. It will never go away. But that's the thing. I wouldn't forgive the debt, because there's got to be repercussions for the people who've taken it. But I would allow people to go through a bankruptcy proceeding and discharge it. And maybe then they can't buy a house for 5 or 6 or 7 years or whatever the number is, because you've got to now prove you're credit worthy. Yeah. But these kids coming to school, man, they've been sold a bill, they've been lied to, thinking that they get this piece of paper, that now all of a sudden that they're gonna that first of all, they deserve to get a great job. Because when I was getting my master's degree in finance at NYU, I was doing it at night when I was working. And there was a whole class, I remember this vividly, on secondary markets. I was a specialist trader on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. I know how secondary markets work. What the professor was teaching was completely incorrect in terms of how the market really worked. Totally incorrect. And I told him this. I'm like, I do this every day. This is not, I left there
It
to
doesn't
come
work
here to
like
take this class. This is completely wrong. And he's like, well, no, and he's made his academic case for why it wasn't. I'm like, you might think so, but you're wrong. But you know what? I want to get A on the test. So I answered. I was like, oh, yeah, it's not right, but here's what the professor wants to hear. But so in many cases, what they're learning is not even correct in the real world. It's not applicable to the real world. And the theory is very different than experience. You got to get people out there. That's, it amazes me. When I graduated with my undergrad degree, I had my piece of paper from University of Colorado, and I remember thinking, like, wow, I've got something of value here. And within the first 6 months of working in New York, I realized, oh my gosh, I was a complete idiot. I had nothing valuable to offer this organization aside from a willingness to learn what they want to teach me, because everything I learned in college was essentially garbage, quite frankly. And so it's, that's the biggest scam. Higher education is just the biggest. It's the biggest scam going. The millennials are pissed off about it. They have a right to be pissed off about it because they were lied to, quite frankly. They were.
We got to wrap this up. Okay. We got to wrap this up because you and I could keep going on for a really long time about this.
Yeah. Somehow we went from talking highlights of 2023 to we get into politics and student
exactly
debt.
Politics and everything.
This is what happens. This is what happens when we're off camera.
So for people listening to this is what you can expect dealing with Brent. Those of you who are his clients already understand that. Those of you who are not, you should reach out to Brent and start a conversation with this guy. He's fascinating. He's interesting. He's got a lot to say, and you might enjoy the relationship. So speaking of which, how do people get a hold of you, Brent?
Absolutely. Yeah. Our phone number in here, if you want to call the office, is 602-255-0555. Andy or Susan or Kayla or myself will pick up the phone and set up a time to have a conversation in great detail. And again, part of my job, quite frankly, is the questions I get. Obviously, we're talking about the finances and we're talking about things that you need to do from a planning perspective. But a lot of it is that stuff. Hey, is my son wants to go here or my daughter wants to go here? Is this degree worth it? And I'll you don't have to agree with me, but I'm going to give you what my opinion is, because that's what you want for sure. Online, social media, we're active on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I'm there almost every day. I put something up there. mpadvisorsaz.com is our website, or smartmoneysimplified.com. And that's got all of our contact information as well.
Fantastic. And you can look in the show notes. It's there as well. For those of you who are not subscribers, this is a really easy fix. Hit the subscribe button. That way you won't ever miss another one of these podcasts, which I'm sure you do not want to do after hearing this one. So
hey, we normally keep things on track a little bit.
If we don't usually go right off the rails down.
No, if you never listen to our podcast, the normal format again is we have a guest on and we dive deep into whatever they're doing in the world. And again, our planned guest today is over in Baghdad, Iraq, and had some connection issues. So Bill and I just said, hey, you know what? We're gonna do what we do offline.
We'll
anyway,
go there. Here we go, boys and girls. But thank you, Brent, and listeners. Thank you very much. We appreciate you taking the time to listen today. On behalf of Brent and everybody at MP Advisors, I'm Bill Tucker, reminding you to go out and live your best life today. Thank you.